Welcome to another video where we're going to be doing some translation from the book of Ephesians. Today we're going to be in chapter 4, verses 17 through 24. And this class is offered courtesy of Maranatha Baptist University and Maranatha Baptist Seminary. If you're not part of our class but you've happened upon this video, feel free to check out the course offerings there at mbu.edu/online. That's where this class is coming from. Anyway, let's go ahead and dive right into the text today. Welcome to the Greek text of Ephesians 4, verses 17 through 24. This section is just a little shorter than what we've seen most recently. And if we see the text more in its more condensed form, this is what we're looking at. And so let's scroll down and begin with our translation here in verse 17. We start with tuta, which is a demonstrative pronoun, and it means this. Un is a conjunction, which means therefore. And then he's going to say, I say and I testify. And what's interesting that what follows this is a infinitive. And this infinitive, as we translate it out, we're going to see it has imperatival force. And really we have to make a decision whether we want to translate it as an imperative, which a lot of the major versions I believe do, or if we want to try to keep it as an infinitive. In our translation, I'm going to keep it as an infinitive because I think it can make sense, even though for stylistic purposes in English we might prefer to translate it as an imperative. But even so, what's happening here is we've got I say, and then this is a complementary infinitive. It's really piggybacking on the indicative verb right here. And if you remember in our first year discussion of how infinitives can work, both in Greek and in English, they can be complementary infinitives. They're completing the idea of the head or main indicative verb. So anyway, that's a little bit challenging maybe when we reach here. We're going to try to keep it as an infinitive. So let's begin our translation. I say, therefore, or you could say, therefore I say this, but I think this sounds a little better. This I say, therefore, and testify, en curio, in the Lord, and the is understood here. There we have meketi. Me means no, or at least it's a negation. The kappa is probably added to divide the two syllables, the two vowels, the a and the e here. And eti has to do with time, and the idea together is no longer. This I say therefore and testify in the Lord, no longer literally you to walk. And you'll remember that the infinitives, when they take a subject, are going to take that in the accusative case. So the idea is that you no longer walk. We could even say for, add the kind of understood preposition here, for you to no longer walk. So what we have so far, and we translated down to peripatein there, this I say therefore and testify in the Lord, for you to no longer walk. Okay, so that works. But we might want to, if let's say we're finalizing the translation, maybe transform that more into an imperative or a verb with imperatival force. But in any case, we've kept the infinitive just as it appears in the Greek. And now we're down here at kathos here. Even as also, and then we've got ta ethne, the Gentiles. I hope you forgive me for all that music in the background, that noise. We've got elections going on in Uruguay, and constantly today we've heard these trucks going by that are advertising the different candidates and their slogans and things, and it's a little obnoxious, but it's really hard to escape. So, even as also the Gentiles, and then we've got peripate, which means walk, and then we're going to have in the vanity. Even as also the Gentiles walk in mateoti. Gentiles walk in the vanity. Tu nous auton. Of, and that's nous is the word for mind, and auton is of them, of their mind. So even as also the Gentiles walk in the vanity of their mind. Now in verse 18 we've got a participle from a verb which means to be darkened, and we can see that it's a middle passive participle. This phrase is a bit tricky because we've got a participle here and we've got another participle here. So we've got two participles which are both emphasizing the same reality. Being darkened in their mind is the idea. And here we have we can see that it's plural. It's present or continuous, and it's active. It's basically saying that they are darkened in their mind, and this is the state in which they are being. And so getting that dual verbal idea to emphasize the state of being is going to be kind of challenging in English. So we might just want to make a little note on the side that it's hard to bring that out. And we could say something like, let's see, we have, even as also the Gentiles walk in the vanity of their mind. The idea is their minds are darkened or being darkened. So we could say, whose minds are darkened. We could even say maybe being darkened, but I think the being has more the idea of they're in a state of being darkened. So whose minds are being, or who are in a state of being darkened. I just realized that the text is a little small. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit. Might make it a little easier for you to see what we're doing here. And then we have a word that means being alienated or estranged. Now in English, when we say that we are or someone is estranged, generally it's estranged from something. And we don't see in Greek a preposition that means from, but that is, when we're going from Greek to English, it's implicated in the verb itself here, and the genitive which follows. So we could say being, we're talking about the same Gentiles, right, whose minds are being or in a state of being darkened, and maybe again in parentheses, being estranged is a word that's a little more common, synonymous with alienated, being estranged from the life of God. Dia with the accusative is because of or on account of. So let's put because of, estranged from the life of God, because of the, and we know what an agnostic is, right? This is ignorance, someone who claims to not know. Because of the ignorance. And then this is when we see it followed up with an article that's in the same case and same number and gender. It signals that whatever follows is probably modifying the ignorance. And sometimes we have to translate such articles with a relative pronoun. So we've got the ignorance, which usan is a participle. It's probably best translated here as a verb. It's from a me. And so the ignorance which is in them. You can see the agreement here, right? We've got accusative, feminine, singular, and here we've got an accusative, feminine, singular ending. The ignorance which is, and then it's in them. So let's type that out. The ignorance which is, or you could say that is, in them. And then he's going to elaborate a little bit more here with the same preposition dia with another accusative. And so let's just go ahead and put because of again. Because of the, and porosin is the word for blindness. And then we've got tes kardias, which is the word for heart. So the blindness of the heart of them. So this is plural, this is singular. And we'll just try to keep it. Sometimes maybe in Greek they'll use a singular when the plural is in view, if it's being modified by a plural adjective. So their hearts, but really he probably uses singular because he's talking about these people all have something in common, and it's that they don't have Christ. So their unified heart, so to speak, is blind. But we'll just keep it singular in English as well, even though in English it might be a little more unfamiliar to see that. Because of the blindness of their heart. And then in verse 19, hoitines. Okay, so this is a relative pronoun again. It's the combination of hoi, which is a relative pronoun, with tines. Tis, it means who, but sometimes you see it combined to provide maybe more of a rich, at least sounding, but sometimes grammatically more rich pronoun. The blindness of their heart, who, apergekotes, and this is the word for becoming calloused or having lost all feeling. And we can see with the kappa and the omicron that this is a perfect active participle, right? And it's plural, so it's still talking about the Gentiles here. Normally we see a new tau for participles, but when we see the kappa, omicron, we know we're dealing with a perfect participle. So we could say who having become calloused or who having lost all feeling. And I think that gets at the idea a little bit better. It makes it more clear because we know if we get a thick calluses on our hands. I remember one summer when I went to tasseling, my palms were breaking apart, and they were very sensitive, but the more I worked at pulling those tassels out of the corn, I got calluses, and I was so grateful to have those because it wasn't as painful. And this is an example of having lost feeling that is not positive. Who, having lost all feeling, themselves, we've got an intensive form of autos, okay, intensive pronoun. And paredokan is the idea of delivering. They delivered themselves to, aselgeia is the word for sensuality. So, who having lost all feeling, gave themselves, and you can see this is from paradidomi, right? The kappa alpha, now the me verbs, they take their aorist with a kappa alpha instead of a sigma alpha. And there is sometimes overlap between the aorist and the perfect tense. Here I chose just an undefined past verb, an aorist verb, if you will, to translate it. But it wouldn't be bad either, especially if contextually he's emphasizing the present results of some past action, which he seems to be doing here, but just to be on the safe side, and I've kept the past undefined verb in English. Who having lost all feeling, gave themselves, or delivered themselves even, I think I like that word a little better, delivered themselves to, or even over to sensuality. And then ice looks like it's going to be an ice of purpose here. And this is sometimes, ice is purpose or result. It's not always just in or into or unto. And here he's talking about the purpose or the result. They have delivered themselves over to sensuality. Eis ergasian. We could say for the working. Ergasian is the working. Akatharsias is uncleanness. And then it's modified by pases. So the idea is every unclean act, or you might even translate all uncleanness, for the working of, I'll just say every unclean act in greediness. So we've got here, they have lost all feeling, and they've delivered themselves over to sensuality for the working of every unclean act in greediness. It's something that they love, they're passionate about it, and as all of us were, if we're outside of Christ, it's not like we're above this, we've just experienced the grace of God. But what's operating here is greediness. People long for these things, and they continue to go after them, and then become addicted to unclean acts. And so the picture is a grim one here. Let's go back to the top real quick and read what we have in English. This I say therefore, and testify in the Lord, for you to no longer walk, even as also the Gentiles walk, in the vanity of their mind, whose minds are darkened, or in the state of being darkened, estranged from the life of God. It's talking again about not just the mind, but the Gentiles themselves. We might even say then, whose minds, who are estranged, just to make clear that we know we're not talking about the mind itself, even though that's certainly part of it, who are the Gentiles estranged from the life of God because of the ignorance which is in them, because of the blindness of their heart, who having lost all feeling have delivered or deliver themselves over to sensuality for the working of every unclean act in greediness. Okay, now let's go to verse 20, and we're going to begin to see the contrast here. But you, humes, not so or thus, from hutos, emathete, learned Christ. But you have not so or thus, or in this way, learned Christ. A is if, and then ge, probably best translated indeed here, along with a. If indeed, him, you, okay, now akuo means, and we can see that it's aorist, right? Second plural. So you have heard, or in this context, it looks like he's talking more about having understood. Lots of people have heard, but they haven't understood. Lots of people have heard, but they haven't accepted the message. These Ephesians were different because they heard and understood, presumably, and also have followed Christ. So you have not so learned Christ. That's another reason maybe to translate it as understood, because he's talking about learning something, right? So if indeed you understood him and we're taught in him. Now again, here it's a little more natural sounding and contextually appropriate to translate these as perfects. And if someone says, well, it's not perfect, and we didn't learn that in first and second year to translate these as perfects. Again, what conditions the meaning of a word? It has to be the context. And so there are times, again, where the aorist and the perfects are going to overlap a little in our translation. Sounds a little awkward if we just keep it as past undefined here. If indeed you, we would say understood him and learned in him, or we're taught in him. Have understood him and were taught or have been taught in him. You have understood him and have been taught in him. Kathos is even, and then we've got a form of emi, even as something is, even as, and then he's got truth in Jesus, even as, so we just should put the truth is in Jesus. In verse 22, epathasisthai is the infinitive again for putting off. And so we'll try to keep that parallelism and that infinitive translation, even though maybe in a final draft we'd smooth it out by changing it to more of an indicative verb, or in some cases more of an imperative. The idea is for you to put off according to the proteran, what goes before or former, and this is lifestyle. Sometimes translated in the older versions as conversation, right? So epathesthai is for you to put off or to take off. This is a word that talks about putting on and taking off clothing. For you to put off according to the former lifestyle. Here we are with ton. According to the former lifestyle, the old man. And then he's going to describe something about this old man. Phtera is the idea of being in the state of corruption, or that is corrupt. Sometimes these participles function, they can function kind of like an attributive adjective does. But if we try to keep that verbal force, we might say, according to the former lifestyle, the old man, which is being corrupted. Now, perhaps, which is being corrupted. We're using first year categories to translate, and sometimes that works, and sometimes it's not quite the best reflection of the Greek. The old man, which is being corrupted. The question is, does he want to give the idea that this is something that's presently happening and getting worse, or is this just a reality? That's something to think about as we would finalize our translation. The old man, which is corrupted, or even corrupt, but this isn't necessarily, shouldn't rule that out. Which is being corrupted, or which is corrupt. Kata, according to. Tas. Okay, so now epithumias is the word for lusts or passions. And then he's got tes apates, of deceit. Now we could translate this, the deceitful passions, but do you see what would be happening there? Corrupted according to, according to, type that in, according to, and then we have tas above. We have lusts of deceit. All right, literally. Now we could put something like this if we said the deceitful lust. But do you see what would be happening there? If we say deceitful lust, we're saying that this is an adjective which is plural, must be plural in Greek because it's modifying a noun that's plural. But in Greek, we actually have the plural of lusts, and it's being modified by the singular apates. If we just say the lusts of deceit, we're reflecting that a little better. Deceitful lusts transforms it maybe a little more than what we want, because, particularly, Paul is going to make a comparison here. He's talking about the lusts of deceit, maybe the lusts which are rooted in deceit. And then if you look down here, there is a beautiful parallelism, which is its opposite. And he says, he's going to say down here, in righteousness and holiness, and then look at this, tes aletheas, of the truth, or which is rooted in the truth. If we just transform them as adjectives, that parallelism, that comparison is going to be a little harder to see. So let's keep that in mind. He's going to be comparing these with this. As we translate it through, I think we'll appreciate it more. So the lust of deceit, anenusthai is the word, and to be let's see, we want to decide how we want to translate the de, whether that's and or but. So we'll go back. The old man which is being corrupted according to the lusts of deceit. We'll translate it as and. Again, he's talking about them here. And for you to be renewed. And then to pneumati, in the spirit of your mind. So again, he's talking about them, plural group of people, but he's using a singular noun to describe that. So, and for you to be renewed in the spirit of, and down here we have your mind. And then verse 24, and let's put a comma there, and to put on, ton kainon, anthropon, and to put on the new man. And then we've got ton again, modifying, functioning as a relative pronoun, which, the new man, which, kata, according to, down here we have God, according to God, tisthenta. You can tell, perhaps this is, okay, a participle, right? So that something's being created here, maybe was created as we compare in context, but then we've got the alpha, which is modifying. Okay, this is a third declension because it's a participle, but this is the masculine accusative singular ending, so it's modifying the man. That's pretty clear if we just review the context, but grammatically the connection is there as well. To put on the new man, which according to God is created in dikaiosune, in righteousness, and in righteousness and holiness of truth, or of the truth. All right. Now, one question, there's definitely a parallel here, concept, contrast going on. The lusts of deceit and righteousness and holiness of the truth. And these things, it probably has to do with both the fact that they're rooted in these realities, either our actions and attitudes are rooted in deceit, or our attitudes and actions are rooted in the truth. And it also, whatever we're rooted in, produces a certain kind of work. It'll produce lust unto more ungodliness and more unholiness, or it'll produce righteousness and holiness. So we've got, as usual, we have quite a bit going on in this passage. We've got a decision to make every single day. Are we going to walk according to the lusts which are rooted in deceit, which they produce works of deceit, or are we going to put on the new man? It's a decision, an opportunity we have as believers, which according to God is created in righteousness and the holiness of the truth. We believed in Christ, we believed in He was the way, the truth, and the life. And now our actions can reflect that fact too.